Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting of the Wallingford Planning and Zoning Commission to order. We're acting as the Wallingford Aqua Protection Agency. And this is our Monday, January 13th, 2020 meeting. And at this point in time, I'd like to introduce the members of the commission that are here this evening. To my far right is Jamie Hine, who's an alternate on the commission. Next to Jamie is Commission Member Jeff Cohan. And to my immediate right is Commission Member James Fitzsimmons. To my immediate left is Commission Member J.P. Benoit. And next to, who is our Vice Chairperson. And next to J.P. is Rocco Matarazzo, who is Commission Member and our Secretary at the staff table. To my left is Cheryl Ann Tubby, who is our recording secretary, and next to Cheryl Ann is Casey Han, who is our town planner. And at this point in time, I'd like to turn our meeting over to Mrs. Han.
Thank you. So the primary kind of impetus for this meeting is, I think it's good for the Aquifer Protection Agency to meet. And also that we completed our yearly inspections, and it's also time for several of the registered locations are due for a renewal of their registrations. And so I wanted to provide you with our inspection results and then sort of discuss the renewals. Typically those are done as we do that. In the past, we've done those administratively, really because there's not really a level of discretion associated with them. They have regulated activities, they're identified registered sites, but I thought it would still be appropriate, given the fact that we had just gone through the inspections, to allow the commission to weigh in on whether or not you were comfortable reviewing those administratively, to ask any questions about the inspections. And then I thought, since some of the commissioners haven't been on as long as others, we could do a brief discussion and allow you to ask some questions if you have any about the role of the Aquifer Protection Agency and kind of what we do as staff in our inspections. And also the question had come up about sort of the ability of the commission to, some of the procedures and the ability of the commission and commissioners to participate in inspections and things like that. So we did get a memo regarding that from Attorney Small as well. So briefly, I did provide you with some information. The packet's not in the best order, about your role as the Aquifer Protection Agency and what the Aquifer Protection Agency does. DEP has a lot of resources on their website, so if you're interested, I would definitely recommend going on the website. You can even do the training course on there. I did the in-person one many years ago, but there's just a lot of good information on there. There's actually an article about Bristol's Aquifer Protection Area program. I was there when that program started. That's when I first got my training. So essentially, the aquifer is our underground drinking water supply. It feeds the well fields in town, the public well fields in town. So there are two basic identified aquifer areas in the town of Wallingford. And then there are also some areas that feed well fields that are part of the regional area and part of the city of Meriden. And essentially the way the program works, it's a state mandated program under section 22A-35400 of Connecticut General Statutes. And essentially the state, the town, and the state, the agency, and the water company, the town and the water company, which here it's convenient because we have our own water company, work together to sort of ensure compliance with these regulations. And the way the program works is the program here started in about 2007. There's mapping that was done by the state. Now the level A mapping is done by the water companies, but ours was, I believe, was done by the state back then. So basically, we were given designated areas, and then the town had to undergo a process of identifying an inventory of identifying all of the properties that might contain what are defined, that might have activities that are defined as regulated activities, and that it's in your regulations. So we have regulations that were adopted, Aquifer Protection Area regulations. You adopted them as the agency. So you're the identified Aquifer Protection Agency. You are acting independently, not as the Planning and Zoning Commission, but you are the same membership. So your regulations are based on the state model, and those identify what the regulated activities are. But essentially, regulated activities are activities that involve a significant amount or a potentially significant amount of hazardous materials. So we identified the sites in town within the aquifer areas. We identified the sites, and they're only commercial. Residential uses are exempt. We identified the sites that might contain those, and then there was sort of a further review process, and those that were regulated are required under the statute to register with the town. Now, in a sense, that protects them because they become a registered site. So they say, yes, I have these regulated activities on my site, and they're basically allowed to continue them. No other site in an aquifer can ever register for a regulated activity. You can't come in and try to do it or anything like that. If you are a regulated site, if you are a registered site, you can come in and try to change your regulated activities under a permit or add regulated activities under a permit. We've never had anyone try to do that, at least not in the time that I've been here. I don't think anybody's ever done it. If you do that, there are added standards and things. The registered sites, on the other hand, also mean that you're expected and required to engage in certain best management practices in terms of how you handle your hazardous materials. So that means having things like secondary containment, spill kits on the site for something like a gas station. You have to have a materials management plan. You have to have a plan for if you have a spill and how you clean it up. So there are certain things you have to do in order to provide a certain comfort level that hazardous materials that you use on your site are not going to end up in the town's drinking water. To that end, we also do a yearly inspection. That's not written into our regulations. It's a policy. And so you may have seen in the memo from Attorney Small, one of the recommendations she made is that we add language. The state's newer model applications include language that discusses a yearly inspection. And we are basically able to do that because it's under a program. We're not identifying specific properties. We're inspecting every property that's registered. So it's not essentially picking on a site. It's all registered sites that we inspect. So that's kind of the quick overview of kind of how it works. Maybe I'll stop there and see if there are any questions before I get into the reports and the new registrations.
Any commission members have any questions for Mrs. Hand? Seeing none, Mrs. Hand, if you please continue.
No. Okay. So in your packets are the reports with all of our, and I did also include for you the registration form that we use and the checklist that we use when we do our inspections. I do that with a member of the water company. If we were to find some significant issues, that gets handled in a variety of ways. Typically, as you saw in most of these reports, we more make recommendations. There aren't significant issues. There is an issue on one site that is not currently registered. There was a court case. We actually ended up in court with them over this. They were court ordered to register. They never have. So I've spoken with my aquifer protection contact at DEP, and the decision was made that if we're not able to get them registered and for that to get them into compliance, then DEP is going to get involved, which brings a greater, if they come in to do an inspection, they'll bring in several agencies. They'll do a very sort of thorough investigation that goes even beyond the scope of just aquifer. So you'll see in here that for most of the sites, a lot of times we make additional recommendations, but usually there's not, fortunately, there are not that many sites in our aquifer, and usually we don't find anything of great concern. We always are trying to make sure that everything's really well protected. And I think most of the properties understand that this is people's drinking water, and so it's important. There is also, I mean, there are some unusual, there's a junkyard in our aquifer. So, I mean, they're sort of necessary by nature in conflict with one another. But there has been a lot of cleanup on that site over the years. So this year there were relatively few things to be addressed. So you have the reports, and I guess what I want to go over with you are two things. See if you have any questions, any concerns, any comments, anything kind of direction you'd like to give me and the water division moving forward. Some of these sites you'll see we do have to go back out to, and then sort of playing off of that, are you comfortable with those sites that are re-registering, which is most of them re-registering through an administrative process, is really the question.
Members with any comments for Mrs. Hand concerning her request or comments? Mr. Fitzsimmons.
I have one, and it's probably technical, but I just want to make sure I understood. You gave us a copy of the registration form, and the registration form indicates that a $500 fee will be submitted with the registration form. Is that always been the fee, or is that an increase? And did we set the fee, or how's the fee determined, and has it ever changed?
That's a good question. So that was set when this process was first created locally. You do set the fee, and actually, what I wanted to recommend, it doesn't appear that there was a fee set for the renewals, and I don't think that it should be the full 500. I'd like to recommend that it be $250 for the renewals, which is more consistent with our a site plan application. If you do it administratively, you could reduce it down to the $130 administrative fee if you'd like to.
Sure.
Yeah, just to clarify, because there's 3 times you'd use a form: one for new, one for renewal, and one for modification. So if I'm in this,
You're not new.
I'm not new, so the renewal I agree should be decreased.
Yeah.
But I wasn't sure if these fees are in line with others, or do we? Like I said, I don't remember. It kind of surprised me. It's $500. I think that's fine, because you're right. It's our drinking water, but I'd rather have them conform than not do it because it's $500. But I'm thinking the renewal. It's like, renewals should be less if we're not doing as much work.
Yeah.
And the modification should be like a new, because that means it's more work.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and the permit, so if somebody comes in for a permit where they're changing or intensifying, I believe it's $1,000. It's a separate form, but there is a lot of work involved in that case, and there is a higher level of activity going on. So, and I think the 500 is probably was appropriate at the time based on the amount of work for the new registrations. But yeah, I mean, I would say for a renewal, I would say, my suggestion is the $250.
Thank you. And I just have a comment, just on the letter that's sent out. In the letter, like I'm looking at one for, it's ABIT LLC. It says you're aware this office representative and Representative of Wallingford Water and Sewer Divisions performed an inspection at the subject property, but we're not identifying the property. In this particular case, apparently the LLC, its mailing address is 284 Whaley Avenue, so it would seem that, the properties, and I suspect with most of the other ones, these are the properties.
I
The
see what
property
you're saying.
address is
Yep.
the correct one, but I would suggest that you, in your letter,
Yep.
you may want to identify the property.
Okay.
Anyone else? Mr. Cohen?
Wait, yeah, I'll agree with Mrs. Hand that, I think administrative, approvals are fine.
Thank you. Anyone else?
You want to go to the 130 when it's handled administratively? That's your normal administrative fee.
Yes. Do we need a motion on that? Okay.
She's the boss.
So unless there are any other questions, there may be another you may be meeting again in a few months because there may be a determination that I need from you as the Aquifer Protection Agency, depending on how a particular application plays out. But if that happens, we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Okay. Thank you. I guess at this particular point in time, if there's no other questions, comments from commission members, yes.
I'm sorry, I must have missed this, and I really don't want to elongate the meeting, but maybe what I can do is, I'm referring to Attorney Small's comments about, the question I had asked about attending this, and I'm really confused, I guess, between the Aquifer Protection Agency, inland wetlands, and actually planning and zoning at this point. So what I think I'm going to do, if that's okay, is I'll send you an email expressing my, confusion as to what each commission can and cannot do. In a nutshell, inland wetlands did have broad power to inspect, properties when they came before. But I'll detail, I don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, my understanding in talking to Janice, because we did talk, Attorney Small, we did talk about this a bit, is if you have so if we go out and we identify a violation and then the commission wants to go view that violation as a commission, that would be sort of, hold essentially a site walk, then that would be sort of the appropriate mechanism. That's what my understanding is. Similarly to how with zoning enforcement, the commission doesn't go out and identify initial violations. We handle that as staff. I mean, the other part of that in the conversation was we do still, in all those situations, need the property owner's permission to go on there. I think as part of the registration, if we change the language, they can agree to do that. So I don't know if that helps at all, but
Yeah, thanks.
yeah, if you want to send me an email, we'll.
Any other comments, questions before I ask for a motion to adjourn? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we adjourn our water aquifer protection.
Second.
Second by Mr. Fitzsimmons, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, we're adjourned. Have a good evening.